Gold fell onto stone, not poured, not forged, wept. Each tear struck the floor of Asgard like a crime scene detail no one could explain. Heavy, molten, alive. Freya stood unmoving. She didn't hide her face, didn't bow, didn't apologize for what grief had turned into. The gods watched in silence. They had seen war. They had seen worlds burn. But they had never seen sorrow become currency. This was the contradiction that haunted every hall of the 9 realms. Freya, the goddess of love, was bleeding wealth onto the ground. Freya, the symbol of desire, was surrounded by men who wanted her power but feared her pain. Freya, the gentle face of beauty, was quietly rewriting the rules of power, and everyone knew it. Because Freya did not inherit power through lineage or conquest, she paid for it. Not once, not cleanly, but again and again. This story doesn't begin with love. It begins with leverage, and the unspoken truth that every god understood, but never admitted. Freya was too valuable to be free.
Unveil the legends.
Before the tears turned to gold, there was another world, the Vanir realm, older than Asgard, closer to the earth, closer to hunger, fertility, growth, decay. The Vanir gods didn't obsess over thrones and prophecies. They obsessed over balance, and Freya was their most dangerous creation, not because she was violent, but because she understood desire. Desire makes kings stupid. Desire makes warriors reckless. Desire makes gods negotiable. Freya learned Seiðr there, magic the Æsir dismissed as shameful. Not because it was weak, because it worked. Seiðr didn't throw lightning. It entered minds, twisted outcomes, bent inevitability. It was the kind of magic rulers pretend doesn't exist until someone else has it. Odin noticed. The All-Father was not a god of peace. He was a god of prevention. Prevent rivals. Prevent ignorance. Prevent being surprised. So when the war between Æsir and Vanir exhausted both sides, Odin offered peace, not forgiveness, terms. Freya and her brother Freyr were sent to Asgard, officially as ambassadors, truth as insurance. Asgard wrapped them in gold and ceremony, but the message was clear. You belong to us now. Freya felt it immediately. The way conversations stopped when she entered. The way eyes lingered too long. The way God spoke to her magic instead of her face. She was admired. But admiration is just hunger with manners, and the clock began to tick. Odin didn't ask Freya to teach him Seiðr. He studied her, watched her rituals, listened when she thought she was alone, collected fragments of power like stolen bones. Then one night he spoke the truth out loud. He needed her magic, not to protect the realms, but to protect his position. Freya knew the danger. Seiðr was not meant to be wielded without consequence. It demanded vulnerability. It demanded surrender. It demanded that the user accept uncertainty, everything Odin hated. But Freya also knew this. Refusing him would end badly. So she taught him, slowly, carefully, like handing a blade to someone who doesn't understand blood, and the imbalance began immediately. Odin grew stronger, colder, more distant. Freya felt weaker, not in power, but in safety. Then came Seiðr, a god-shaped absence, a wanderer, whose presence felt real only because it never lasted. Freya loved him anyway. That was a fatal flaw. Seiðr vanished. No warning, no body, no explanation. Freya searched. Across Midgard's dirt and sweat. Across Jotunheim's frozen silence. Across realms that smelled like rot, salt, and old magic. Each journey stripped something from her. Hope first, then certainty, then restraint. And when she cried, the world answered. Gold formed beneath her tears. Kings followed the trails. Gods whispered calculations. Grief became a resource. And when the Æsir Vanir war finally ignited again, Freya saw the truth clearly. Peace had never existed, only delay. So she made her final move. She claimed half of the dead. Not for glory, not for Odin. For herself, Fólkvangr became a sanctuary carved from loss. A place where warriors rested instead of rotted. And for the first time, Odin was afraid, because Freya no longer needed permission to matter. Here's where the myth fractures, because the stories told about Freya are clean, too clean. They say she chose Fólkvangr. They say she shared the dead with Odin as an equal. They say she thrived after Asgard. But myths are often written by the ones who benefited most. Look closer. Freya didn't rise because the system welcomed her. She rose because the system cornered her. Every role she stepped into was defensive. Teaching Seiðr wasn't generosity, it was survival. Claiming the dead wasn't ambition, it was protection. Remaining desirable wasn't vanity, it was leverage. And that's where the darker theory begins. Some scholars believe Freya's endless search for Otter was never meant to succeed. That Otter wasn't just a lost lover, he was a mechanism, a cycle. Disappearance, grief, journey, gold. Each time Freya left the halls of the gods, the realms stabilized. Harvests followed her footsteps, conflicts cooled, magic realigned. Her pain wasn't incidental, it was functional. Freya became the emotional engine holding the 9 realms together. And Odin knew. That's the part no saga sings. The All-Father understood exactly what Freya's suffering produced. Wealth, balance, control, and he let it continue. Because as long as Freya was chasing something she could never hold, she wouldn't challenge the structure that fed on her. Think about that. A goddess powerful enough to command fate, yet trapped in a loop of loss that kept everyone else safe. Odin sacrificed an eye for wisdom. Freya sacrificed herself piece by piece, and no one called it heroic. That's the real inversion. Odin is remembered as wise. Freya is remembered as emotional. But wisdom is admired, endurance is exploited. And Freya endured everything. In the end, Freya stood among the most powerful beings in existence. She ruled Fólkvangr. She mastered Seiðr. She was worshipped across Midgard as love, fertility, and beauty incarnate. Yet listen to what's missing. She never ruled Asgard. She never stopped being watched. She never stopped being negotiated. Over. Even after everything, even after the tears, the teaching, the war, Freya was still spoken about more than 2. Here's the irony carved into the bones of the myth. Freya gained authority over death, but lost sovereignty over her own life. Her magic reshaped destiny, but couldn't unwrite the roles imposed on her. She became essential, which is the most elegant form of imprisonment. Because when everyone needs you, no one lets you leave. That's why Freya never stops searching. For Otter, not because she's weak, but because searching is the only space where she isn't owned. The wilderness, the road, the unknown. Those journeys weren't romantic, they were escapes. Moments where Freya wasn't a symbol, a resource, or a solution, just a being moving through silence. And that's why her story survives. Because it isn't about gods, it's about systems. Systems that reward suffering as long as it's productive. Systems that call endurance strength so they don't have to offer relief. Systems that praise power while quietly deciding who is allowed to wield it freely. Freya didn't lose, but she didn't win the way legends pretend she did. She survived. And survival, in a world built on control, is the most subversive act of all. Freya's story leaves behind a truth the myths never say out loud. Power doesn't always come from conquest. Sometimes it comes from being the one who absorbs the cost. So here's the question worth sitting with. Was Freya empowered by her sacrifices, or was she engineered to make them? Was she a goddess of love or a pressure valve designed to keep the gods in balance? Drop your interpretation in the comments. because the next story makes this even darker. Odin is praised for sacrificing an eye for wisdom. But what if that sacrifice wasn't noble? What if it was calculated? What if Odin didn't lose his eye for knowledge, but paid it to ensure no one else ever surpassed him? That story comes next. And once you hear what the All-Father really traded for power, Freya's suffering will look less like fate and more like a warning.